welcome Sister Sana Saeed. So real quick background on Sister Sana Saeed. Sana Saeed is a producer and host of AJ Plus based in San Francisco. Her work as a writer has appeared in the New York Times, Quartz, Salon, The Guardian, and al-jazeera English. Her work centers on media representation in Islam of U.S. foreign policy, surveillance, and access areas, as well as American leadership. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Assalamu alaikum. Oh, come on, everybody. I'm going to be that person who's like, I need to hear a louder. So, assalamu alaikum. Thank you. Oh my gosh. So I'm coming from San Francisco, where it was very cold, and wearing a pashmina hijab in this weather is it's not good. I don't recommend that. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you guys about all my stuff. I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about social media activism. What does that even mean? And I don't want this, I'm going to be talking at you guys for a little while, but if you have any questions while I'm talking, please raise your hand. I want it to be interactive. I want this, to actually be of benefit to you, to help you understand some of the issues. And if they're, don't be afraid of really kind of challenging even what I'm saying, or if you want to bring up something that's been on your mind, feel free, just raise your hand, and if I see you, hopefully we can get a mic to you. So again, I was asked to talk to you guys about social media activism, which is kind of a scary word these days. You're like, oh my gosh. So I have a question for you guys. When you hear social media activism, what comes to your mind? Anyone? Raise a hand. Sorry? I can't hear you. Okay, dawah by media. What else? Sorry? Love? Blogs? What else? Not on the menu. Yeah, so being on the table so we're not on the menu. Okay. So here's what I think of when I hear the term social media activism. There are two things that come to my mind. One is when tweets and Facebook posts come to replace active action by hands. And the other thing I think about when I hear social media in general is a really powerful tool for elevating our own narratives and for connecting to people and communities. And I know that sounds a little kind of maybe contradictory, like how can social media be something that kind of makes us apathetic because all we're doing then is tweeting and maybe posting on Facebook? How can it be that, but then also be a great tool for connecting you with communities that you may not have access to? The reason why it works that way is because social media, like really anything else, it's a tool. And it's primarily a tool for communication. And like any tool, it's what you make of it. So it can have some really great benefit, but it can also be a bit of a curse and really, really inhibit us from sometimes actualizing our entire potential as individuals and as a community. And that's what I want to talk about today, is how to use social media to actually uplift ourselves as a community. And again, talking about social media as communication, when a lot of us, when we first got Facebook, why did we get it? We got Facebook because we wanted to keep in touch with our friends, and then maybe we got it because we wanted to know what was happening in the world, because it kind of really nicely aggregates the news for us. When we got Twitter, right, for those who have Twitter, you wanted to maybe communicate some of your thoughts and ideas and opinions to an audience, whatever the audience was. If you have Instagram, yeah, you're posting photos, but that's still communication. You're communicating maybe that filtered selfie, or that dinner that you had that was so good, or this beautiful sunset that you passed. You're trying to constantly communicate with an audience that you know is there, and then an audience that you don't know is actually watching you. And the thing is that every time we try to communicate on social media, we're communicating either something that's deeply personal, something that's deeply maybe political, or something that's totally random. And I want you to think about social media, exactly how powerful it is, right? Because it's totally unprecedented. It's really changed, and it sounds like a cliche, but social media has really changed the way you and I can talk to each other, right? It's totally changed that. And it's done that by breaking down barriers of access. So for instance, if, how many, you guys all know who Colin Kaepernick is, right? Right? By a show of hands, who doesn't know Colin Kaepernick? Okay, so Colin Kaepernick, for those of you who don't know, is the quarterback or the backup quarterback for the San Francisco Giants. Go Giants. And I know I just said that in Texas. And he has made headlines recently for refusing to stand for the national anthem. So in protest of police brutality against black communities, but also other communities as well. So he, you know, let's say if I wanted to reach out to him, right? 10 years ago, it would have been very, very difficult for someone like me to be, you know, just to find contact to someone like Colin Kaepernick if I wanted to say, hey, I want to show you my support and what you're doing. Whereas, you know, maybe I would have to write a letter to a fan club or something. Now I can send him a tweet, and maybe he'll read that tweet. Maybe he'll like it. Maybe he'll respond to it. Maybe he'll just see it and he won't respond, and maybe he will. And that there's something really powerful in that when you think about it, is that I can now directly contact people who maybe 10, 15 years ago I would have had zero chance of having any kind of direct line of communication. I can also, as a journalist, if I see, for instance, I'm on Twitter or on Facebook, and I see a woman in Nigeria sharing a powerful story about her community, her particular community, I can reach out to her directly, and I can see that story. I can see her sharing, as, you know, if she's sharing images or other people's interviews or what have you. If I want to reach out to someone in Flint, Michigan, you know, and I want to ask them how their child is being affected by the poisoned water there, I can do that. If I want to reach out to indigenous activists who are currently in North Dakota, I can do that, and I can find out what's happening. And that's where it's so powerful. That's where social media is so powerful, is that it really can connect us to stories and people in ways that we have never really had the ability to before. So again, that's pretty cool, and that's really powerful. But what does all of that mean for us as a Muslim community? As a Muslim community that is made up of so many other communities, right? Like, we always say the Muslim community, but we always forget that the Muslim community is made up of so many different other communities, you know, black, white, Arab, Desi, Sunni, Shia, rich, middle class, you know, which is something, so we, even within our own community, aren't always connected. So what does that mean for us? It means that we have an opportunity, and I'd say even an obligation, to learn how to use social media as a tool that empowers us as a community. And I'm going to explain what I mean by empowering, because it's like one of those words that everyone always uses, but it's like, what does that really mean? And I don't mean like, hey, here's a Snapchat hack that you can use or whatever. I mean that, like, how can we really use social media for a tool of communication with each other in a way that actually uplifts us as individuals and as a community and doesn't tear us down. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of a secret, and it's going to be a little of a tangent, and I'm going to bring it back to my conversation on, or this thing that I'm trying to talk to about, social media. So I personally, you know, how many people here think that, you know, social media is a great tool for quote unquote fighting stereotypes, right? A lot of people think that we can use social media. So I'm going to tell you something that's not so popular. I actually don't believe that we as a Muslim community have to fight stereotypes. I keep hitting this. I don't believe that we have an obligation to actually fight stereotypes. And I used to believe that we did. I really used to believe that as a Muslim community, it would be hijab, that I had to fight, you know, all these stereotypes that existed about my community, about my faith, and about me as a Muslim woman who was in my faith. Because I was 15 when the towers were hit. I was 15 when Afghanistan was invaded. I was 15 when Iraq was invaded. You know, I was 15 when I heard about Muslim men, young, old, immigrant, first-generation Americans being picked up off the streets, being interrogated, and they were arrested without charge. You know, I was 15 when I started thinking about what surveillance was. And, you know, I remember being 15 years old and being afraid that the government was watching me through my, you know, computer camera, which, as we find out, they actually do that. You know, and I was 15 when I realized that I don't have a choice but to be political. I don't have a choice but to actually get sometimes angry and to protest and to boycott. You know, I couldn't just be a 15-year-old Muslimah in hijab who was just trying to, like, stay on the honor roll, right? I couldn't do that. And so, I had all of this anger inside of me as well, and I was seeing all these injustices in my own community, abroad, and it was honestly, it was a mix of like the foreign policies of the two countries that I called home, which was Canada and the United States, and then also, the media coverage and the media narratives that were being spread about me and my community and my faith. So I started, protesting. I got political. I started engaging with different ideas. I started trying to understand different ideas, even though I didn't entirely understand them, but it was very important to me to at least try to understand them. And so because of that, I ended up actually dedicating my life at 15, 16, 17, 18 to fighting stereotypes, right? I became so consumed by it. And there's some good in it, right? Because like I'm sure so many people, you want to protect something so beautiful and pure. You want to protect the deen, right? Because people were saying things about the deen that I'm like, that's not the Islam I know. Those aren't the Muslims that I know. Those aren't the Muslims in my family, in my community. And so it was very easy to want to fight this ugliness that was coming out about my religion, my way of life, my family, the people in my community. And I want you to think about that, especially for the adults in the room, how difficult that is for a teenager, right? You're a teenager, you've got a lot of pressures as it is, right? To dress a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way, drink this, eat that, hang out with that person, so on and so on. All of those pressures, and now you have the added pressure of like knowing everything you need to know about your religion and geopolitics all of a sudden too, right? And that's a lot of pressure that sometimes we end up putting on ourselves, and especially those who are really young in our community, is that we need to, in order to fight, because you can't fight stereotypes without also engaging in some of the very difficult questions that exist about our religion and our politics and so on and so forth. So I quickly learned, very, very quickly, the more I engaged in fighting stereotypes and so on and so forth, I quickly learned that the problem that we have in this country isn't about actually stereotypes. We should be obviously making friends with our neighbors. We should absolutely be doing that. We are, the community of Muhammad, right? We should be loving and we should be spreading love, absolutely. But I don't think that we should think collectively that fighting Islamophobia in this country means fighting stereotypes, because that's not how it's done. Islamophobia is a structure, and that's how we need to start understanding it. It's not just an attitude that exists. It's not just because someone is ignorant about the deen. Because guess what? I'm ignorant about a lot of things. I'm ignorant about a lot of cultures. I'm ignorant about communities in my own neighborhood in San Francisco. But guess what? I don't hate them, right? I don't hate people. I don't, want to say like, well, you shouldn't have the right to pray as you want, or you shouldn't have the right to build this building, or I'm going to go protest, your prayer or anything of that sort. I don't feel that, and I know lots of people who are ignorant, but that doesn't logically lead to them to hating things. So I think we need to start separating ignorance and hate, right? And here's why. Because Islamophobia in this country, we have to understand it as a structure and as a result of certain policies. We have to start understanding that, because as long as we keep thinking that the onus is on us, that we need to fight stereotypes and we need to show that Islam is a beautiful religion and Muslims are peaceful, so on and so forth, guess what? It hasn't worked in 15 years. It's not going to start working now either. So what is it that we can do? Right? Islamophobia is a result of foreign policies, it's the result of wars. It's a result of this current policy of CVE, or quote unquote countering violent extremism. It's a result of surveillance. It's a result of media coverage and media narrative. So it's material things. It's not ideology. It's material things that we can actually have an impact on if we know how to organize, if we know how to educate ourselves on these policies. We know how we can then have an actual impact on these policies and on these things. So Islamophobia isn't someone asking me, why do you wear that on your head? Or, even the guys who were I went to an Eid prayer in Anaheim recently, and just a couple weekends ago, and there were protesters there with the ugliest signs. There were only 4 or 5 of them or something of that sort. But to me, sure, that's Islamophobic the way you and I will talk about it, but that's not the ultimate problem. That doesn't bother me as much as the policies that are being used to tear apart our community here and abroad. That's what bothers me more, and that's how we need to start thinking about Islamophobia. And I think all of this it's not also unique to us. Like, I think that's another thing we have to realize is that this kind of hate that exists in the country, the kind of rhetoric that exists, it's not unique to us as a Muslim community. There are Black Americans here, Black Muslim Americans as well, who are doubly affected. There are Latinos in this country, Latino Muslims who are even more, Black and Latinos in this country face far more obstacles than a lot of us who are in the Arab and Desi and other diaspora communities. And so that doesn't mean it's a competition of oppression, like who's more oppressed or whatever. It's a question of how we can also then start linking our different oppressions, how we can start understanding that we're in the same fight. We're not against each other in that way, but we're really in the same fight, and how we have to start understanding Islamophobia as part and parcel of this greater structure of racism in this country, as opposed to just something that exists on its own that we can fight if it's Meet a Muslim Day and all of a sudden it's gone. It doesn't work that way. So what does all of that, what I just said, have to do with social media activism? It's because I see way too much social media activism from the Muslim community that's basically there's social media campaigns that are about fighting stereotypes and trying to show the Muslim community in a better light. And yes, we do have an obligation for dawah, absolutely. But I think we need to be careful in that in our process for looking for respect, we don't actually lose respect for ourselves and from others as well. Now imagine what an impact it would actually have in our communities for the better, for your children, for, even for our elders, if we start talking about these policies about how our community is policed. Right? Whether it's by the local police, whether it's by the FBI, whether we talk about surveillance or foreign wars, what would happen if we engaged with each other constructively, if we informed one another and we start organizing our communities alongside other communities, whether they're Muslim or not, and we start demanding the rights and respect that we do deserve. I mean, when I was a teenager, I remember that's what it was about. It was about getting out into the street. It was about showing up where you weren't expected and demanding that these are the problems and this is how we need to rectify it. It was about organizing and making ourselves a powerful political bloc, right? To echo a lot of what Sister Linda Sarsour was saying last night, we need to start showing ourselves as a really powerful political bloc because we have that power. And the other thing is that we need to really, really get out of this idea, which I'm seeing way too often right now, that somehow all of this hate started with Donald Trump. Because guess what? It didn't, right? It didn't start with Donald Trump, and guess what? It's not gonna end with Donald Trump. And it didn't start 15 years ago either, right? A lot of us will be like, oh, well, 9/11, and then Islamophobia skyrocketed. Sure, it skyrocketed because of a lot of the policies under George W. Bush and President Obama, but it goes way beyond that. And that's something that we need to start educating ourselves, because it always surprises me how many Muslims I meet, whether they're young or old, who don't recognize the fact that Islamophobia, again, is not something that is, it's not something that's new, right? It's not something that, it's only been really hard the last couple of years. It's something that's been growing for a very, very long time. So how do we as a community actually then use social media, right? I'm talking about all the problems, I'm talking about, all these things. So what do we do then? This is gonna sound super cheesy, but I really strongly believe in this. I think, and I'm gonna explain what I mean. We really, as a community, as individuals, need to be ourselves on social media. And what I mean by that is we need to stop catering to constantly just fighting stereotypes, and my audience is just a non-Muslim audience, and I want to show that Islam is beautiful, so on and so forth. Because what we do in the process, we've put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and that honestly, I've personally seen that hurt people's faith as well. Because then we start elevating ourselves and our community in a certain way where we can't always meet those expectations. So let's start telling our own actual stories. Let's be cultural producers. Start, writing. If you want to write about your life, write about your experiences, write about what you know. And I don't mean writing about post 9/11, I felt this way. I think we need to move outside of that. We're Muslim, we're a vibrant, versatile Muslim community outside of those narratives that have been imposed on us, right? We have a history in this country that goes well beyond even 100 years, right? Like, it goes to the moment that this country was essentially invaded by the colonizers, right? Muslims have been a part of it, for better or for worse, that we have been a part of the structure and the fabric of this country. So I think we need to recognize that, we need to own that, and we need to start talking about that. We need to start writing stories, we need to start whether it means that you're putting out a video or you're just tweeting or Facebook posts, talk about what it is that pains you, what it is that makes you love, what it is that makes you happy. And I know it sounds, some people will be like, whoa, you're taking social media maybe a little too seriously there, sister. But the truth is that like, social media, like I said, it's broken all these this barriers to access, right? I can now, there are all these narratives that are being told about me as a Muslim, you guys as Muslims, all of us as Muslims, but we're not involved in those stories, right? We constantly see that in the media, that people are talking about Muslims, but they're not involving Muslims. We can use social media for the betterment. We can use it to insert ourselves into those conversations. We can use those to actually change those conversations, or we can start our own, because we don't need necessarily the validation of a mainstream. What we need is our own validation. What we need to start doing is actually validating ourselves and each other and each other's experiences. But honestly, like, don't also stop at social media, right? I'm talking a lot about it and talking about how we're using social media, but don't stop there. I think the ultimate goal when we're using social media as a tool for communication needs to be that it has to inspire action. It has to inspire us to actually go out and do something, because as we know in our faith, that the actions by our hands are those that are the indicator of the strongest of those in faith, right? And we can never, ever forget that, how important it is to change something with our own hands and our own beings. So what does that mean? It means that use social media to communicate, to understand, to reach out to communities. Tell your story, but listen to other people's stories too. Try to understand that. But then educate yourself as well, and then go out there and try to do what you can to change your own specific community. And change doesn't come, by the way, with one big action. It doesn't mean I go out, I do a fundraiser, and okay, alhamdulillah, I'm done, right? Change happens through small actions that are repeated, right? Because change, I sound like Obama, ugh. But like, change happens when we, start. What happens is if I start doing something that isn't being done in my community, it becomes a habit for me, right? Inshallah, it becomes a habit, and I start doing it. Maybe other people start doing it, and it's not something that's a one-time thing. It's an action that I've now made into a part of my life. So that means, it could be something as simple as picking up the trash where you see it on your street, right? It means learning how do you recycle properly. What does that mean? And then from there you learn how to recycle, and then you maybe implement that in your masjid, because that's also a huge part of our deen as well, is taking care of the environment. Educate, get involved with Black Lives Matters here, even if that means starting to educate yourself as to why we even say Black Lives Matter. Learn to compost. If you hear about the FBI wants to come to your masjid to give a talk, ask why. Challenge that. You are absolutely that fear that sometimes may grip us. Especially there's power in numbers. And this is what I mean when I say that we need to organize politically as a bloc, because we can, otherwise we do have our communities and our masajid taken advantage of. You hear about a brother or sister in a legal bind, help maybe then raise some money to, so they pay their legal fees, because legal fees can be extremely, extremely steep. Write to your local paper, get involved with your town hall. And I know this all sounds like, oh my God, Sana, we've heard this before. Yes, get involved. But I want you guys to really think about what it means to do these things, right? Because if we keep ourselves really, really isolated, but we're all about like, we got to show a great image of Islam, we got to do this, and we got to show how beautiful the deen is, and Muslims are peaceful, so on and so forth. That's great, but we're not actually helping the deen in any way, right? We're not actually living up to the principles of our deen if we're not actually also going out and changing with our hands the problems we see directly in our community here at home. So, again, we need to be able to have this kind of communication with each other. We need to be able to talk. If I disagree with Sister A or Brother B or whatever, I also need to be able to, even if they're living 3,000 miles away from me, I need to be able to talk to them in a way that is constructive and isn't tearing each other down. And I know that sometimes that happens. We'll let our anger and our frustration get the best of us, but I think that we do have the ability, because I've seen it, to have an incredibly uplifting conversation online and use that to then really build our communities and ourselves as individuals. And honestly, if you have the ability, if I have the ability, or any of us have the ability, because not all of us always can, right? Because we've got people, maybe got kids and you're really busy with that. You're working 3 jobs, totally, right? But if we have the ability as individuals to actually change something or to take certain actions, and we're not taking those actions, because maybe we know, right? Because as another principle in our faith is that if you have the knowledge, it is important for you to share that knowledge and also to make it into action. So if we're not doing that, we're hurting ourselves and we're hurting our community. So that is all for my little talk. And I wanted to now just kind of make it more into a conversation about some of the things I raised. If you disagree with me, please let me hear it. And yeah, whenever you want to start raising hands.
My only concern, I guess, it's not necessarily directed to what you were saying, but about social media in general, because personally I would think that I'm like pretty political. Facebook posts about whether it's Black Lives Matter or even just calling out very corrupt government policies. However, at the back of my mind, I'm always still very concerned about the very real reality that the FBI does create and does use a lot of these social media posts in order to create profiles or even use this against us. And so can you speak a little bit more about how to mitigate this reality but still staying true and to speaking out against a lot of these injustices?
So, and that's actually a really fantastic question, and it's something that, one thing I didn't mention, which is probably one of the most important things, is that if you're using social media, you need to be vigilant. One thing that we don't do is, because it's such a part of our lives, because it's on your phone, right? Your Facebook's on your phone, Messenger, or you've got Snapchat or Twitter or whatever, it's all on your phone, so it's kind of easy to forget that it's like any space where it can be also kind of dangerous and how it's used against you, especially when you're a community or you're part of several communities that are under surveillance in any way, right? I know tons of people personally who are under surveillance, and they know that because there have been people on Facebook that have reached out to them. So one thing that I've taught myself to do, this example, is that, for instance, on Facebook, I don't add anyone if I haven't met them or unless someone else can corroborate who they are. I just don't. Like, it sounds so basic, like don't add someone you don't know, but like, honestly, that's what I do. I'm not gonna add you on Facebook unless someone I know can, let's say, corroborate who you are, whatever, or I know who you are and I've met you, or maybe I'm familiar with your work, so on and so forth. I'm also aware of the fact that, for instance, I professionally am at a place where there's certain things I can say that I couldn't have said maybe 10 years ago if I was on social media the way I am now. I recognize that, right? And I think that's another thing, that you need to always be vigilant about what you're putting out. That doesn't mean you compromise on what you're saying, but it's like, think about what you're saying and who you're saying it to. And remember, the internet never forgets. Everything you're posting on the internet is there forever. Even if you think no one's gonna see that Snapchat, guess what? Snapchat saves all your images. All your images are actually saved, right? So think about what you're sending out into the world, because every time you are sharing, whether it's on WhatsApp or whatever, it's all being saved. So be vigilant about that. That doesn't mean, it's very easy to then kind of be like, I'm never gonna communicate at all, I'm gonna be terrified, blah, blah. But I think it's just about look at the people who are, let's say, in your social media circles. If there's someone who kind of makes you feel uncomfortable, I don't suggest calling them out on it, because, if, let's say, it's an informant or something, that puts you in a really awkward position. But let's say they're not an informant and you accuse them, that also puts you in an awkward position. So what you want to do then is actually kind of just disengage, right? Protect yourself from people who you think might be toxic for you politically or personally or whatever. So that's what I would suggest. And we can talk about it more in depth if you want to chat about it later. But I think it's so important that we remain vigilant as who's in our circles. And also, and just remember that sometimes some things are just out of our control. Sometimes there will be, groups, whether they're government groups or not, that will use our information, that will use what we're saying against us, or they will try to infiltrate our personal spaces as well. And I think you can't let the fear of that stop you, but you can remain very vigilant and just aware. And by that, I'm aware of all your interactions online, seeing what someone is saying, and just being aware of what may happen to the world. It might be private on Facebook, but it's very easy to screenshot. It's very easy to, hack or what have you. So And actually, to be honest, that's something I worry about a lot, right? Is that I say sometimes certain things, there's certain topics I actually stay away from, not because I don't have opinions on them, but because I'm like, there are certain people, like, I'll be honest, like the alternative right, like the crazy, crazy right-wingers, I have been harassed nonstop. So I know what that's like, and the fear of being hacked and so on and so forth, it's very real. And so sometimes, there are times where I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna pick my battles. That's another thing. Pick your battles, because your safety, in your community safety, but especially your own safety, should come first.
I kind of want to piggyback off of that because, like you said, if you want to write, write. If you want to make a video, make a video. But I think that comes with a lot of ramifications, and I kind of want to know how to reconcile. Like, what if I want to put out a video, but I don't want people commenting on how I wear hijab or, this or that? I think we just kind of need help to know, okay, how are we going to put out content? How do we keep our life private but still create a narrative for Muslims?
Okay, and that's a great question, honestly. So there are two ways of dealing with this. One, if you are creating content for the public, right? If you're engaging in the public, you have to understand that, like, people will say, the comment sections anywhere are like where humanity goes to die. It really is. Like, it's just, I know because I've received, I do on-camera stuff, and I've received some of the most horrendous things that you can imagine. I received death threats, the things I get in my other folder on Facebook. I'm like, really? You took the time out to write me an essay just telling me how you would want to kill me? Okay, that's a bit weird. So, and the thing is, sometimes when you're constantly in the public, you learn to develop a very thick skin. It doesn't make it easier always, but you just learn to develop a thick skin. Now, if you want to create, let's say, a video, an article, and you only want to show it to a certain group of people, there are ways for you to do that, right? So for instance, if you want to post a video about a certain thing that's been bothering you, or if it's, let's say, about a social issue or current events issue, I would say first and foremost, always do your research, right? Make sure your facts are straight. Make sure you can cite your facts, because that way, as long as you have the facts on your side, that way people will only be attacking other things as opposed to your actual argument. Secondly, there are ways for you, for instance, if you're sharing it on Facebook, to really make it private, right? So that other people are not commenting on it that you don't want commenting on it. Now, if you have friends and stuff, for instance, who are going to be lecturing you on you're not wearing hijab properly, and that's another story about our personal circles sometimes, right? I left, for me, it came to a point where if anyone was saying that to me about why are you doing this, or why, like, to a point where it was just inhibiting me and my growth, I had to disconnect with those people personally, right? Because I'm like, you're not spiritually helping me, you're actually spiritually putting me back when you do this. So I think it's about, if we're doing it in our private circles, then it's like, how do we, again, like, we can create content which is private, and we can cater it to a very particular audience. At the same time, we have to remember that there's something about the internet, because of the fact that it's so detached from face-to-face interaction, that makes people feel entitled to tell you things that they might not tell you in person, right? So we have to also, whenever we're putting ourselves out there, like physically, if I've written an article, if I have made out a video, you're really putting yourself out there, and with that comes sometimes a lot of good, but also a bit of negativity as well. And part of it is constantly, like, teaching ourselves how do I internally deal with this, right? Because the stronger we are internally with the most nastiest criticism, and surrounding yourself with a good support group, that's so important, by the way. Make sure that you have friends and family that you can turn to when it starts to feel like it's too much, because you don't have to do it alone. I have a lot of friends that I reach out to when I feel like this is too much right now. I reach out to my family, I reach out to my friends. Like, I have a few handpicked friends who I know that they'll understand it every time I go to them and I'm like, look, this just happened, someone just threatened me with this, someone just accused me of this. I need to maybe cry on your shoulder, or maybe I need to just laugh tonight or something. So it's really important that we also surround ourselves with people who help us, like, who will uplift us, as opposed to just kind of be like, well, ignore them, right? So I hope that answers your question a bit. Yeah, okay. It's honestly, the internet is a really tough space to navigate. It really is. So, like, And a lot of it is just learning as you go along and just protecting yourself and your heart. So much of it is really protecting your heart.
Jazakallah for that. I was wondering that maybe there's something out there already, but maybe we need an article or YouTube video or something where we can just go through with some ideas of how to be active on media, like even like posting videos or putting like PowerPoint together with just audio or things like that. So some of us who are not comfortable with their own videos, like they don't want to show their faces, they are still active. They can still come up with creative ideas and make something up. Not everybody is so computer savvy. I mean, they know how to do, like me, I know how to use Facebook and stuff. I know how to do PowerPoint, but I maybe don't know how to put an audio in something like that. So it would be a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, let me just clarify, when I say like go out there and write an article and make a video, I don't mean like everyone has to do that. Like go right now, put on your webcam and start like, recording a video or on your phone or whatever. What I mean is if that's in your capability, if that's something you want to do that, right? If that's how something you want to share your perspective, your life, or what have you, you can do that. I do think, I entirely agree, we as a community are not media literate, right? And by that I mean, A, we don't know how to read the news a lot. Like we'll read, like, and that's not just a Muslim community problem, that's like everyone. But like we actually as a community sometimes don't know how to read the news. We don't know how to engage with the news and current affairs. And then we don't actually know how to create the media that we need for ourselves internally sometimes, right? So one of the things that I'm hoping to develop, inshallah, in the next little while is actually a workshop that does talk about how as a Muslim community we can create our own media. And I don't mean just technical skills, like here's how you edit this and that. That you can learn anywhere, but it's more about what does effective media look like? What does an effective video look like? What does an effective article read like, right? So inshallah, and honestly, I'm sure there's at least 4 or 5 people here who love to write, and maybe they like to write in private. If you're a writer, share, and you want to grow as a writer, share your gift and your abilities with your community. Because it's so important that we also start doing that. It's like, I mean, if you want to keep it private, keep it private. But if you want to grow as a writer, or if you're someone who likes to film, maybe even if it's just on your camera, start using these little skills that you have and these gifts that you have to also benefit your community for itself, not for anyone else, but for itself. I hope that answers your question.
Assalamu alaikum. So one thing with social media is that it also opens up our access and information to all the different types of causes that are out there. What's your advice for dealing with basically activism fatigue, where people are jumping from one issue to the next issue to the next issue to the next issue, like, every day or every week? How do you deal with that?
That's another thing that we have to be so, I'm really glad you asked that question, because it's something that, I can't even tell you how many times I get messages on Facebook where like, why aren't you talking about this issue? Why aren't you talking about this issue? And it's not, I think we need to realize sometimes is that we're not, there are a lot of issues that affect the ummah, but not just the ummah, but also the communities that we live in. And there are issues that sometimes we want to be able to do something for, but we can't always do something. I think we have to also recognize our own, and I think that means being humble and having that kind of humility, is that I can't always be, posting or spreading awareness about every single issue that's out there, right? Pick a certain issue. Maybe pick 5 if you want. I mean, that might be a lot. Or pick 3. Pick in odd numbers. I don't know why. That's what they tell us in video production. Go for odd numbers. Pick 3 issues. Pick 5 issues that you think you as an individual can actually contribute something to, right? And these issues don't have to just be like, oh, Syria and Palestine and whatever. It also means issues in your community, right? Like I was talking about, something as important as recycling and composting. You can tell that I'm from San Francisco, or that San Francisco has taken over me, but it's so important. Things like that, what are maybe those issues that you want to educate people on, and that you're in a unique position maybe to actually make a difference on that end. And I think if you really focus your energy on a few things as opposed to all these different things, you don't get tired, you don't get fatigued, because then you have a purpose as well that you're doing. At the same time, we shouldn't put all of our energy on social media either, right? Like me posting about, a certain conflict 5 times a day isn't necessarily going to bring about change. It's like, what else am I doing outside of social media so that activist fatigue doesn't set in? Also, it's about, I think, balancing what you're putting out into the world. Are you only talking about, for instance, negative things? Or are you also trying to uplift your own community and other communities and talking about positive things as well? And so I hope that answers your question, that it's really, I think, it's a mix of like having humility and understanding that we can't be constantly involved in absolutely everything, that sometimes, you know, I really do care about what's happening with the Rohingya in Burma. I absolutely care. It breaks my heart. But I know my limitations, that I cannot dedicate my life right now to that, right? And it's hard to admit out loud even, but it's true. And I think it's so important that we need to be able to do that. Is like, you know what, right now I can't do this. But you know what? There are people in my neighborhood who don't have clean clothes. So what can I do to help them right now, right? Or, oh, there's an issue that small businesses are being affected in my community that I can do. Okay, let me do that. Or maybe something about Yemen or so on and so forth. And I pick my 5 issues that I'm really passionate about. So I hope that.
Salam sir. AJ plus videos are really powerful, mashallah. Good job. You pick the right stories, and anybody in social media should have watched at least one in their life, right? So, can you take us through the process of picking the story and, you know, and the protection aspect of it for the benefit of all of us?
Absolutely, absolutely. By the way, how many people here actually watch AJ plus videos? Okay, cool. All right, and if you don't watch it, I'm very disappointed. Chances are if you have Facebook or Twitter or anything, you've seen the videos, you just didn't realize that they're AJ plus. So we do, for those of you who don't know, AJ plus is the all-digital division of Al-Jazeera. And we're based in San Francisco. We've got a team of about 80 people, about maybe 40 of us or so are video producers. And we produce short videos that are created specifically for social media. We don't go on TV, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, our big space. So here's how we actually go about telling our stories. I'm very fortunate to work for a company which positions itself as wanting to tell the story, or does tell the stories of communities that are ignored, and really taking a non-mainstream, like non-American mainstream perspective on those issues. Which then people, you know, read to mean, oh, they're pro-Islam and pro this and so on and so forth. So the way we pick our stories usually is, it's pretty cool. We're a very collaborative team. So let's say I want to talk about, so let's say the Rohingya in Burma, right? I'll go to my executive producer, who is, you know, Egyptian Muslima. Awesome, she's my executive producer, she's my boss. And I'll go to her and I'm like, hey, I really want to do this story. And she's like, okay, what's it going to look like? Show me what it looks like visually. Tell me what it looks like story-wise. What's the angle you're taking that no one else is talking about? Tell me this. And then I have to think about that. I'm like, what am I going to put out there that maybe an audience, an American audience, because our primary audience is also an American audience. What's an American audience going to want to know? So we talk about that, we discuss that, and then the process begins. Let's say she approves it. The process begins where I start researching. I start grabbing video and images. I start writing a script. And then either I'm on camera or another presenter is on camera, and then I'll be producing it, you know, do the whole direction thing, everything like that. Then go put it all together, give it to an editor, an animator, who'll go and make a beautiful product in the end. So that's kind of like generally what our process is like. It's really quick. You know, I just recently created a video. I did it in a day, because that's like all the time we had to get that video out. Other videos sometimes take us 3-4 days. It really depends. But I think the most powerful thing at AJ Plus is that we're collaborative, right? And which you don't see in a lot of newsrooms. And I think it's so important, if we're talking about storytelling and powerful storytelling, whether it's in our communities or it's in a newsroom, it has to be collaborative, right? Because I can offer a perspective to one of my colleagues that he or she may not have. And they can offer a perspective that I don't have. And it's totally cool. And I think that's like, that to me is a perfect way to how we should be working in our communities as well, and reaching out to people within our communities and outside of it, so that we can also better understand perspectives that it's okay to be ignorant, right? It's totally okay if we're ignorant about certain things. The only way we can fix that is if we actually reach out and talk to people and ask for their nuanced perspective, which is what we do in my research, and I love it. In fact, that, like, I have learned so much because I am actually one of the most diverse researchers in this institution, and that's incredible to me.
few minutes back you mentioned, you want to create a workshop separately where you can, talk about how to write a good blog or how to produce a good video, and that can be really effective, right? So I understand we don't have the time for a workshop here, but can you give us like some tips on how to write effective blogs or effective Facebook posts so that it communicates our point effectively, or make videos that really, are kind of a little more effective than what we do as a layman? Will be helpful in this workshop.
Yeah,
Thank you.
totally, absolutely. So I actually didn't start as a video producer. My background is as a writer. That's like my primary kind of mode of identification when it comes professionally. So in terms of now, I don't know how, I started off as a blogger as well. I don't think that blogs have really, they don't have the same kind of, the same kind of weight that they had even 5-10 years ago, right? Now what you see is that people will really share like your Facebook status, right? Like I can write sometimes a mini essay on my Facebook and people will share that or whatever. So it doesn't matter what medium you use. I mean, I'm not saying that don't write blog posts, but I think about what your audience is. If you're writing something short and sweet, you could put that on your Facebook as well. If you want it in a particular blog, that's cool too. If you're starting off a blog, a website, and let's say you're talking about certain issues. Let's say you're talking about the election, right? Make sure your blog is actually like, or your writing is really focused. So sometimes people will be like somewhere where they're writing all over the place, or posting about all these random things. But I think it's really important that if you have a blog or a website, that you keep it focused on a particular subject. And it can be a really broad subject. So if I say US politics is my subject, that's really broad and that can encompass a lot of things. But that way when an audience is coming to my blog or my website, they know what to expect, what I'm going to be talking about. So that's one thing, is keep your focus, keep a focus there in your writing. Secondly, don't write super long blog posts. Way too often I see a lot of writers who come out and and I used to do the same thing, you write like a 3,000 word, 4,000 word essay, and there's no kind of also, coherence to it in any way. Make sure you have your arguments, make sure that everything is also structured, and this might mean revisiting like old grammar textbooks from English, from grade 12 or something like that, right? So look at how you're structuring your arguments, how you're introducing the issue. Look at your grammar is so important. If I'm reading a piece and there are grammatical errors, like your punctuation is all over the place, or you're spelling words wrong and this and that, it's a huge turnoff, right? It's a very huge turnoff to me, because it's hard for me to take your argument seriously if you didn't take your own argument seriously enough to actually like take care of the grammar and the spelling and all of that. So I think it's really basic writing skills. The other thing which is really important is consistency, right? I'm a terrible blogger now, because like I'll write and then 4 months later I'll write again. Don't do that. That's like the worst thing you could do. Give yourself time to write at least once a week. Even if it's 2 paragraphs, do it. Because consistency as a writer is the only thing that makes you better as a writer. There are things I wrote 5 years ago, 2 years ago, that I look back and I'm like, I disagree with what I said. I don't actually agree with this argument. It's a very poor argument. And that's part of growing as a writer. And that only comes about if you are consistently writing, because you can also then consistently look back at what you've written and how you've also evolved in your thinking. And then I think it's really good to be able to argue against yourself. So if you're making a certain argument, and this goes for anything, by the way, not just writing, but if you're making an argument, what's the counter argument that you see coming? You have to be able to always know what the counter argument is, so you can argue against that too, right? So that's what I would recommend, in a really quick in a bit of a nutshell, like that's what I recommend for like strong writing. I also tell people personally that if you want to write nonfiction, so if you want to write again like things about current affairs and politics and so on and so forth, start by writing fiction, right? I used to write fiction stories, short stories. No one ever read them. I never published them. They were so bad. They were so bad. But what happens with fiction writing is that you have to be creative. You have to be imaginative. You come up with stories. You learn how to tell a story. And that's what writing about politics or the news or humanitarian crises, all of that, that's what it's about. It's about telling a story and knowing how to tell a story. So I really recommend that to anyone who wants to write. Start by writing, start by writing nonfiction or writing fictional stories, short stories, whatever they are. No one has to read them. Write them for yourself, because you find that when you're kind of forced to be creative in that way, you bring that creativity into your nonfiction writing as well. So, that's why I can't hear. About videos? Whew, okay, so video writing is very different than blog writing. And I had to learn that the hard way, because when I first joined AJ Plus, they hated me because they're like, you write like an academic, stop, this is video, no one's gonna listen to you. And I'm like, I'll prove you wrong. And they, I was wrong. But when you're writing for video, the thing is, video is purely visual, right? No one's reading anything, unless you have subtitles, but video is purely visual. So you have to be writing to the visuals. So whatever you're saying needs to be represented in some way. You have to have footage that is engaging, because an audience, sure, they'll be interested in what you're saying and maybe what you're doing, but they want a visual that's going to be strong. So you need to have really, if you're filming a person, there has to be good framing, right? There has to be good lighting. Lighting is everything. Audio is so important, because no one's gonna, if you have really bad audio, I don't wanna watch a video that has bad audio, like straight up. Even if it's very important, if the audio is bugging me, I'm not gonna watch it. It's very difficult. The other thing is, keep the video short. Oh my gosh, I cannot count how many times I've seen incredible ideas for like videos for dawah or for engaging inside of the Muslim community or whatever, but they're like 20 minutes long or 10 minutes long and they're on Facebook. Don't do that. Don't make a video that's like 10, 15 minutes long and put it, or even 6 minutes long and put it on Facebook. Facebook is a medium where you can take a video to be like 2 to 3 minutes. Keep it really short, snappy, talk to the audience, have some nice little footage in there as well, and keep it engaging that way, as opposed to, keeping it 10 minutes long. Because you know what? You're gonna lose people within the first minute, right? That's something that we look at a lot, is when do people drop off in our videos? And if the video, if I put out a 4-minute video on Facebook, people drop off sometimes at the minute mark and it's too long. Because that's the nature of Facebook. YouTube is different. You can have a 10-minute video on there, no problem. But Facebook, which is like the best medium you want to actually get your customers from, is a wide audience, right? You want to get the video, you want to get the video snappy, interesting, and engaging in that way.
So you mentioned making videos and writing and stuff like that. And I was just wondering, where would you recommend sharing on Facebook? Either friends that already share already, Twitter, YouTube, or followers, so that I can go and share this content and make sure I have a wide audience.
So, in terms of, I'll say starting with Facebook. Facebook is a really great medium for sharing content, because let's say if I upload a video onto my page, it's really easy for, let's say if you're my friend and you like it, you can share it immediately, right? It's made sharing so easy. So when I post a video for my own personal page that I want others to see, I make it public, right? Those videos are public, and then people will share it. And if it's something that people think is worth sharing, then they will share it, and it will kind of start spreading on its own. Again, it's about consistency. You don't put out a video once every 3 months, and you're like, why are you doing well? Why aren't you getting more than 200 hits or something like that? Well, because you're not being consistent. And the more you put out, and I don't mean like putting out once a day either, maybe once a week, maybe that's how you start off, or maybe every 2 weeks you put out a video or something of that sort. But consistency also helps in trying to build an audience. And also knowing what words to use, like what is your title for your video? Because sometimes people do search on Facebook, like for certain things, believe it or not, people are searching for things on there and they might come across your video. In terms of building your social media following, Twitter, the way I actually got my current job, right, as a video producer and host for AJ Plus, is actually through Facebook and Twitter, right? And all I was doing was I had built a pretty big, alhamdulillah, big audience through just consistently posting content, which for me was just interesting. I wanted people to know this, but I would post content and I would have my own commentary on it. And I guess people liked the stuff I had to say. I don't know why, but they liked it. And so it took time. It wasn't like 2 years later and whoa, okay. It took time, but and that was also before there was a huge boom in the way that social media is right now. But there are a lot of ways for you to actually build your audience on social media so that they can then share the content that you're putting out, but it starts with you being consistent, right? And also having, I mean, it sounds so cheesy and really San Francisco, but again, it's about like having your brand. Like, what's your brand that you're putting out there? How are you presenting yourself? You know, I'm not saying like you have to be an expert, like don't present yourself as an expert, but rather present yourself in a certain way that you want to be taken as well. And again, just be consistent with it constantly and engage people, right? If people are commenting on it, engage with them as well and see what they're saying. And ask people like, hey, share this video. You know, in the video, you can totally say, that's totally okay for you to be like, you guys, if you like what I have to say, share the video. And if you disagree, tell me why. You know, people like having that human contact in a space that's so detached as well from like human contact, ironically. So that would be my advice. That's what I would do personally.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to comment on something that you had said about the fact that, you know, a lot of people are concerned about kind of putting themselves out there, and also along with the idea that, you know, we're trying to present a certain image and that people just really have to present themselves. And I think that there's a huge disconnect between people's ability to relate to certain people because we're always trying to put out a certain persona as opposed to showing that we're actually normal people. And I would say that this falls even more so upon public figures, people like imams, because it's very rare that you'll see that they let you inside of their personal life to show that they're human. And I know in fact, different sports that they follow, and you'll never see any of that stuff pop up. And the reason why I wanted to say that is because something people ask about, you know, the negative feedback that you get. And the one thing that I wanted to say is that the Islamic concept of riyad, that showing off, most oftentimes Muslims think that riyad is when you do something like do charity so that people think you're generous. But riyad is also when you don't do something because you're afraid of what you're afraid of saying. And then I had a question that maybe you could elaborate on, is that I found on my own social media that live streaming on Facebook has now really allowed to, you know, take off to another level. So could you comment a little bit on what is live streaming, what platforms does it work for, and how do you utilize that?
So here's the first one. I think it's so important that those who are in positions who are in public positions in our Muslim community, especially imams, shayukh, I think it's so important for people to come across as human as well. And then I also think that for those of us who aren't in those positions, I think it's important for us to remember that shayukh and imams are human beings, right? I think I've seen way too often, you know, everyone is capable of making mistakes, or everyone has different perspectives that we may not always agree with. And it hurts my heart sometimes, like how, you know, we sometimes will put people on such a pedestal that if they just teeter a little bit, we just rip them down, right? Or it somehow affects our faith, and it shouldn't affect our faith. Because again, it should actually be like, oh, everyone is human. That's beautiful. Regarding your question, live streaming, I'm really glad you asked about that. Has anyone here actually used Facebook Live yet in any way? Okay, so very few people. So Facebook Live, and then there's Twitter has Periscope, which is okay, but Facebook Live has really, really taken off. We use it a lot too. It's a great, like, it's a really great tool. And it's something that we see is being used by people to kind of connect with their friends a bit more. But it's also being used very politically too, right? In the not politically, but it's being used to actually, you know, we've had so many instances recently where we have a case of police brutality that's been caught on Facebook Live, right? And that's incredible that people are being, like, you can now see this absolutely live, something happening somewhere. In terms of how to use it effectively, I think it depends. You need to know who your audience is. So if your audience, let's say, is primarily young Muslim students, right? So that could mean then maybe, you know, you going on Facebook Live and here 5 things to remember for the day. something like that. Have a format of some sort if there's a very particular audience that you're going for. If you're just kind of trying to do Facebook Live for your friends, maybe it's you got some like thoughts running through your mind, do a really quick Facebook Live. If you're at a protest or you're in a public space and something's happening, you can totally put on Facebook Live as well if you think it's going to go somewhere and it should be on camera and people should see it. So there's a lot of benefits in how we use Facebook Live, and it's again, like any content that you're putting on social media, but especially on Facebook, you need to know who your audience is. So again, if your audience are young Muslim students or they're older people, so you need to be able to cater it to them. If you're doing a class sometimes, and that's a great way. Even if it's an hour, 2-hour long class, I think Facebook cuts it off at 90 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, for live streaming, and then you have to start again with a new link. But if you're doing a class, you can put it on the page as well, on your personal page or on the page of the Masjid or whatever. And people who aren't in even Texas or in the United States can join in as well. So, and it's happening live. And then, live is also cool because you can see the comments in real time, so you can engage with your audience that way as well. So if you want to provide a class, maybe it's a Sisters Halakha that you want to do on live, right? And you can open it up that way, or if you want to do a halakha for, talking about an issue that's affecting Muslim Americans across the country, it's a really powerful tool, and I would love to see more Muslim organizations start using it to actually in that way, in which whether it's shayukh using it to give important reminders or something of that sort, or it's being used to kind of democratize access to certain kind of classes, because I think a lot of people would benefit from that. And again, it's about consistency. So for instance, if you're holding a class on a Tuesday and you're also opening it up to Facebook Live, people are going to actually expect that class comes back next Tuesday, because that's just the nature of how it is. So it's about also, again, everything I've been saying has been coming back to consistency, and it's so important. So if you're going to be using it for a certain class, or even if you're giving my 5 daily reminders, you have to be consistent. Because if you're not consistent, if you miss a certain day without telling people, they're not going to come back. Because people on social media are very fickle. Sometimes social media, I mean specifically on Facebook, can be very fickle. If they don't get what they're expecting that 1 week, they might not come back because they're like, maybe it's not coming back again. So that would be my recommendations. I hope that's helpful.
Jazakallah khair, sister. We have a surprise guest for you over here. We've convinced Sheikh Abdul Nasser Jangla to come here and just say a few words on the same topic. But before that, I'd invite Adi Bari to just say a few lines of Quran for you. Sister, maybe you can just...
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.